Hello, everyone. I'm Eric D'Souza, and joining me today as we discuss novella writing and other length story writing is Hilary Davidson. How are you today, Hilary?
Good, thank you. Thanks for talking to me again.
Well, it's my pleasure. Hilary Davidson is a Canadian author of mystery, crime, and thrillers, best known for her Shadows of New York series and the Lily Moore series. Her her Lily Moore series debut novel, The Dangerous Dawn, won the 2011 Antony Award for Best First Novel. Sorry, The Damage Done. Sorry. Subsequently, her Shadows of the New York series debut novel, One Small Sacrifice, was listed among New York's bestsellers. Prior to switching to full-time writing, Hilary worked as a journalist for Harper's magazine in New York, where she's currently residing. Hilary has published, I think I counted it right, seven full-length novels?
Yeah, seven full-length novels. That's right. And I think something like 50 short stories now.
At least 50, I think.
I've been
uh,
saying 50 for a while and the number has been going up. So yeah.
I was looking at one of the websites and it was a very long list of short stories, also novels, or novellas, sorry. So today we'll be talking about Dangerous to Know, The Grifter Song, Volume 8. And we talked a little bit about this before last year, and I think you were just working on it or it started being published. And it's quite an interesting concept, this Grifter Song. So let's start with that. What is that series about?
Yeah, so this is the brainchild of a writer who his pen name is Frank Zafiro, which he writes his own books and short stories, but he came up with this concept, I want to say maybe 6 years ago now, at least. And he wrote the first book in the series, and it's about a pair of grifters. They're involved in a romantic relationship with each other, Sam and Rachel, and each part of the series, each novella is sort of a different adventure. There are a few constants in the background. They are on the run from the mob. There are some associates that reappear in different installments. But basically, Frank sort of hands it over to the writer and says, sort of do what you like with this. You pretty much can't break Sam and Rachel up, but you can do almost anything else. You can tell the story from whatever perspective. Because they're grifters and they're always off in different schemes, there's really nothing off limits. And in Dangerous to Know, they're impersonating archaeologists who've got, treasures from a dig to sell. But they've been horse breeders and psychics and all sorts of different things through the course of the series. And I should say my installment is actually episode number 28. There have been, I want to say, 6 to 7 episodes a year since Frank started the series. So, and he's got some really terrific writers. Sean Cosby did an episode. Eric Pruitt, Holly West. Like, there's just a crew of really terrific writers that have contributed to the series. So yeah, it's a great crew to be part of.
Yeah, I realized I said volume number 8.
Yeah, it was just
But
missing a digit there.
and I cut and paste that from the Crime Writers of Canada website, so I'm gonna have to get them to fix that one. Because I saw the list and I was like, wait a minute, but I didn't click. So that's on me. I apologize.
No, it has been a really long running series. I know episode 8, I don't even know what year that was. That was probably the second year that that they ran the Grifter Song. Yeah.
Did you feel sort of a pressure at all to get the voice right, or were you just free to do what you liked?
I felt a lot of freedom with it. What was interesting is that to some extent you're playing in a sandbox that's been created by the editor and by other authors. So I was already familiar. I haven't read every novella in the series, but I have read a bunch of them. So I knew sort of different things that had happened to Sam and Rachel, and little things that I wanted to sort of call back to because I wanted my part of it to feel organic and like it belonged. So I think I'd say I felt pressure that way because I wanted to get the details right and wanted to have a story that would sort of maybe push the series a little further in a way. But there was just so much freedom. There was freedom in terms of I go back and forth between the two main characters, from their perspectives, and they just total freedom, like in terms of how I wanted to tell the story. Frank Zafiro, the editor, was absolutely wonderful to work with, really generous, really thoughtful. He was a resource if I had a question about something that had happened in the past, but there was no pressure to conform to any style or anything like that. It was one of those ironic situations, I think, sometimes when I'm writing, it's a blank page and I can do whatever I want with it. And that can be kind of intimidating in a way. It can actually be a little daunting to sort of be like, oh, I'm creating a world from scratch here, instead of here are some familiar characters the readers already know, some things that are already established about them. And there's a series Bible that you read over, before you start working on it, but then you're good to go. And so I actually really enjoyed that approach.
Sounds like a really fun project, and I think a lot of mystery writers would probably enjoy it. Is it always mystery writers who do it, or does he ever delve into like a romance writer?
I would say, well, there are some people who are crossover actually. So I think Holly West, her initial background was as a romance writer. I think there are a few people. I know there was someone who writes more in the realm, I want to say, of like gothic and horror a bit, who got into it, who did an episode. Um, Generally, it's mystery writers, and most of the names that I can think of are certainly mystery writers that have contributed. But I think it's open. It's not meant to sort of just be a mystery series, because each episode is self-contained. They can have these different aspects of whether it's horror or suspense or the gothic. So yeah, and definitely romance is a big part of it. So other authors, if you were interested, please do check out the series. And Frank is very much online, so I'm sure he'd be, if writers were interested in contributing to the series, I'm sure he'd love to hear from them.
I know with yours, I had a feeling of indecent proposal. I'm not saying too much because you say that in your blurb, and I read it and I had to buy it. And if anybody's interested, they're only like $3 because they're all novellas. So I think the whole series, you get each one for about $3, and it's definitely worth the read. In yours, you had, like you said, you had some freedom. You switched coasts, and you were actually in my neck of the woods in Vancouver. Was the reason why you wanted to set it here? Not when I say
gosh.
here, on the West Coast?
Yeah. So actually kind of a funny story about the setting. And I'm not entirely sure why this came into my head, but when Frank first approached me, he and I have known each other for a few years and just, have a lovely relationship. And so when he first approached me, it was just sort of, would you be interested in working on something for the series? And I said, well, definitely interested, but I was working on something else at the time and didn't have any ideas. And I told him basically I'd kind of get back to him as soon as I, had a concept. And it was really strange. It kind of came to me all at once. And I think part of it was that I had been out there a while back visiting Vancouver and Lions Bay and driving up and down the coast. Actually, a friend of mine, Robin Spano, lives in Lions Bay, and she had organized this amazing writers tour of local libraries, and had gotten it was me and Ian Hamilton and Darren Collier to her house, like to hang out as her home base. So I got to know this area a little bit. It's just this tiny hamlet. But it was, Robin was an amazing host, and she put so much of the color in. So some of her jokes, like about people putting on bear bells purportedly to scare the bears, but just really it announces to the bears where dinner is. There are things like that that actually ended up in the novella, just because I was only there a short time, but I absolutely loved it. And the Sea to Sky Highway made such an impression on me. I think that there's always that sense of, go west, there's always possibility out west. And this was kind of a real stretch for Sam and Rachel as characters to sort of pose as archaeologists, to sort of, it was a much tougher kind of scam they were trying to run in this case. And so I just felt like this is sort of like reaching for the sky. Like it's such a beautiful area. I could like rhapsodize about it. I absolutely adore it there. But it just felt like you can reinvent yourself. Anybody can be anything out here. There's lots of new money. There's lots of opportunity. And so it always feels a little like you want fertile ground like that to play with if you're running a scam. Or so I assume. What do I know? What scam have I actually run?
Don't admit to anything.
Yeah, exactly. I realize as I'm talking, wait a minute, do I know too much about scams?
um, you have written longer work. You have, I was on your site, and you have a few series, but you never seem to run them too long. The longest running series you have is 3 books. Is there a reason why? Is it just your imagination? It just wants to cling to something new all the time?
No, honestly, it's business decisions more than anything. And so, with the first 3 books that I wrote are the 3 books of the Lily Moore series, which was about an amateur sleuth. And the first book set in New York, second one set in Peru, third one is set in Mexico mostly. And I was a travel writer at one point, so I sort of made use of some of my own days on the road travels to write about Lily, though of course any fictional people that were murdered are purely fictional. But really what happened was that I was with Macmillan for those 3 books, and I wrote a standalone. I really wanted to do something different with a story that I really couldn't tell through an amateur sleuth. And then I moved on to a different publisher, and the new publisher, I think this is pretty common in the business, isn't interested in a series that another publisher owns the rights to the first 3 books. And so that I kind of quietly set aside, even though I actually have lots of other ideas for Lily. I sort of wrote those 3 books as kind of an arc where they're sort of interconnected, that brought her to a certain place. And I imagined picking up a couple of years later and another 3-book arc. That has not happened. Not to say that it couldn't, because characters, they don't age the same way that the authors do. But the other series, the Shadows of New York series, was a police procedural. There are only 2 books in that series. There actually was going to be a 3rd book, and I started writing it. And I actually was incredibly sad to stop, but my editor said, actually, we really want you to write a standalone. To be honest, I love writing both series and standalones. They're very satisfying in different ways. Standalone really gives you the freedom to do anything. Anything can happen to any character. You don't have to keep them alive for the next book in the series or anything. And that book that replaced my 3rd book in the series is called Her Last Breath. And it's actually by far my most successful book to date. So I think my editor made a very good business choice. But it's hard because I'm attached to the series characters, and really, I guess, attached to all the characters on some level. But there's kind of a parallel universe where I imagine them existing, and I haven't let go of them. I'd certainly still love to write the 3rd book in that series at some point.
I've had the good fortune to have read your short stories, your novella, this one, and I've read One Small Sacrifice, one of your novels. And I would say you are very adept at all 3 levels of writing, lengths of writing. How does your creative mind work? Like when you start thinking of a plot in your head, do you start thinking, oh, that's a short story? Or, yeah, that short story needs to develop into something longer.
It's a great question because it's so amorphous. For me, the process is often that I will start to envision a character. It's almost like hearing a voice, like hearing this character trying to tell me a story, trying to get attention. And sometimes it's very clear, like it's one thing they want to say. It's not part of something larger. It's clear it's just going to be a story. Other times it's not. And what I tend to do is when I start hearing that voice, and it'll come out at weird times, like I'll just be, brushing my teeth or something. And it's like I will speak, involuntarily thinking about the characters. I will start making notes, and I will make notes about every single thing that the character sort of reveals about itself. The more time I spend thinking about a character, the more things come out, the more I know about how they interact in the world or how they would treat a situation. but it sometimes takes a long time. So in the case of Her Last Breath, my most recent book, the main character in that, Deirdre, I started thinking about her, I think it was something like 6 years before I actually wrote the book. I was thinking about a woman who gets a message from her sister after her sister dies, saying that her husband killed her, basically. And I didn't know what to do with that. It was sort of like, this is a great scenario, but I don't know what it is. And I also don't know what the, you know, what could this unfold into. So I sort of took notes, and set it aside, which is what I do with a lot of stuff. So sometimes there's a really long gap. I think my longest gap ever was once 9 years for a short story, where I had the idea, wrote maybe 500 words of it, set it aside because I had no idea where it was going, came back a long time later and knew exactly where it was supposed to be. So it's a very weird process, but for me, it's organic. I'm not an outliner. For me, it is first and foremost about character. And so I'm always thinking about, what does this voice sound like? It affects how I tell the story, because I write in first person, third person, sometimes multiple viewpoint. And everything is different, and sometimes I take several stabs at it to get it right. Certainly The Damage Done, when I was first writing that book, I wrote it in the third person. I think I got about a third of the way through and realized, no, you need to hear Lily Moore's voice, and I had to go back and rewrite from the beginning in the character's voice. So I'm always very open to changing things up when I realize I've hit a wall and stuff isn't working. I'll either change it up or I will set it aside for a while.
Well, it's working, and I'm picking up that you should thank your editor for letting you revisit the ideas for your newest standalone, because it looked like it paid off good for you.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, it's, my editor is very supportive. She knew that I wanted to write a standalone. So just to be clear, when she said, I want you to write a standalone, this was not her coming out of the blue, telling me something. I had expressed an interest in doing a standalone as well. But yeah, it is funny. I'll say, I think in publishing, a lot of the time people think that an author's made this creative decision that, oh, I don't want to do this series anymore. I've done enough with these characters. And I know very few writers who feel that way. A lot of us would actually love to continue writing about, the characters that we write about. But, business definitely gets in the way sometimes.
I know some successful authors with series sort of regret it. It's like, I really want to write something else. And then the publishers are just like, no, you have to write the next Sherlock Holmes or Miss Marple.
Oh my goodness. Well, and there's a perfect example, yes, that Conan Doyle absolutely hated Sherlock Holmes by the end, and literally tried to kill him off, and then had to bring him back because fans wouldn't accept it. And yeah, you definitely have this phenomenon of people. I guess it's the grass is always greener, because I think, how wonderful to have this character. It would almost feel like a friend, their world so well, you can explore different things. But yeah, I'm sure that there are a lot of people who, would love to do something a bit different. I think someone like Walter Mosley, who sort of does series, does standalones, does mystery, does sci-fi, like that sort of, that's an amazing freedom to have if you can do something like that. Otherwise it's like the grass is always greener, right?
Well, it seems like your editor gives you a fair amount of freedom, so I'm glad she does. Because you keep on bringing out award-winning literature. And like I said, I'm a fan. I joined your webs after talking to you last year. I joined your mailing list.
Thank
you. I've been trying to read as much as I can of yours. So it's a pleasure chatting with you again.
So kind of you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, Eric. That is just such a kind, generous thing of you to say. Thank you so much.
Well, and thank you for spending the time with us today. It was always a pleasure. And also thank you for everyone watching.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you, Eric, for the interview, and thanks to everyone for watching.